we've all walked into a home, and especially me, having done disaster restoration 20 years. I walk into a house and I'm immediately even picking up on odors, and it's like,
Yeah.
they've got a problem,
Yep.
and
Yep.
old homes are known for it, but even new homes, where either they had a water damage, they didn't mitigate properly, it wasn't built properly, the windows are leaking, the doors are leaking, vapors getting trapped, a whole range of things. And those are very expensive to fix afterwards.
Welcome to the Passive House Podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House Podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House Podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
Zach, you look, you're wearing a hat. Are you cold at the moment?
It is cold. It is cold. I also cut my hair extremely short, and so it's both cold and I'm getting used to it.
You need extra insulation on top.
Yeah, exactly. But it's chilly, it's dark, it's so dark here. Oh my god, it's just like, the days are so short. So we're looking forward to getting to the 21st. Actually, when we record this, we will be past the shortest day of the year, or when we play this, it will be past the shortest day of the year. So I have that to look forward to.
Yeah, because we're recording this earlier on in December. I've just come back from Adelaide, where it's summertime. And it was the most bizarre week we had the most rain. So Adelaide traditionally does not rain. My parents' house is super, super dry. It rained pretty much every day for a solid week. I think they recorded more than their average monthly rainfall for December, just in the week that we were there.
Wow.
So they were kind of happy because they like it when it rains in Adelaide, but, yeah, big thunderstorms, it was quite a bizarre week of weather. But back now in Auckland, it feels like we've returned to summer. Down here, over here, which is quite nice.
Nice, and you're on the mend.
I'm on the mend. Second time around for COVID for me.
I've been there. Yeah,
it's out there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this week we're going to listen to a interview that I had with someone that I met on the bus in Houston. I really love getting out and visiting houses on the site tours, and it's always a great chance to sort of randomly sit next to someone and strike up a conversation. And that's how I met Steve. Really interesting story, background. And how he went from doing something pretty different in renovations and fixing leaks, water leaks, to becoming involved in Passive House. So we'll get into that. But before we do, let's thank our supporters.
Let's do. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Glavel, Minitaire, Partel, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Well, as I mentioned, I met Steve McKee on the site tour it was just before the Passive House Conference FestCon in Houston earlier in 2023. And we got chatting. Steve McKee was a general contractor in Charlotte area, North Carolina, for nearly 20 years. And most of his work and the work of his team, he had quite a sizable team by the time he pivoted, mostly involved fixing leaks where things like pipes had burst, or from relatively minor issues, insurance kind of jobs of homes, to fire damage and smoke damage, those sorts of things. But interestingly, most claims come from quite small, or what start as relatively small leaks, where there's a burst in a pipe that happens while people are on holiday and they come back, and the whole laundry or the kitchen's flooded, those sorts of things. And it reminded me a lot of the work experience that I had in building surveying, where we did destructive testing and actually found where something had gone wrong in the cladding and had led to mold and dampness issues. So there was a lot that I feel is transferable to thinking about moisture control in buildings. And we get into that a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed. This is my conversation that I caught up with Steve later on when I was back home, and asked him a little bit more about his background and how he got into Passive House.
So I'm speaking with Steve McKee from North Carolina and Quality Renovation Services. How are you going, Steve?
Good.
I think you said you're Climate Zone 5, is that right? Around 4 or 5?
We're Climate Zone 3, but we're at the cusp of 2. We're right on that, right on the border of North Carolina, South Carolina. So we've got, we're more, our climate's more hot, humid. We barely get snow, maybe once a year, maybe.
Right. So similar to what we met in Houston recently, and had the chance to go around and have a look at some houses there in that type of environment, which I found very interesting. The warm, the application of Passive House in the warm climates, which we'll come into. But let's go back a little bit to what you do and how you came to be doing it. Has North Carolina always been home for you?
Well, for about the past 20 years. Before that, worked in California, upstate New York, and before that, I was in the Army. So, I've moved around a lot.
Yeah,
lived in a lot of climates. Lived for a few years in Montana, which
wow,
talk about extreme differences of climate.
Yeah. And how did you get into building?
Well, we were up in Albany, New York. I was working for a large corporation, actually something completely unrelated. I was director of food service for a large supermarket, doing fresh prepared meals to go. And they did a downsizing. And my position was not part of the new organization.
Yeah, right.
So I really, at that point, decided I was not going to stay in that industry. And I got into disaster restoration. Fires, floods, not the cataclysmic, like what, wildfires, but more of the standard wash machine overflows, the dishwasher hose burst, that type of thing. And did that for about almost 20 years.
How did that happen? I mean, that seems like a sort of a fairly niche, like a random thing to one random thing to another random thing.
A friend of ours owned a business up in the Albany area.
Right.
And he knew I was looking to open up my own business. Of course, I didn't know really what that meant. I'd always been a corporate employee, had not owned my own business, didn't know what I was asking for. And so he and I were talking, and he was like, you might consider this line of business because it's fairly recession proof. I mean, I had 3 criteria. I wanted it resistant to recession. I wanted it to be scalable. and I didn't want it to be all me, because the scalable part, and that I knew that if I kept it limited to me, I was going to limit the growth.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Did you jump in on the tools? Were you doing the work, or were you just organizing the work?
Well, I did at the very beginning. You've heard of the moving company, two men in a truck in the States.
Yeah.
I was the reverse. I was one man. I bought two trucks.
Right.
And initially, I was doing it all. Now, when I say do it all, always on the contracting, I was using subcontractors. That's really, I delved a little with employees on construction, but I found the model for me was better to be all subcontracted.
Right. Because you're dealing with like plumbers and specialist trades.
Yeah, exactly. And even when you get into framing and drywall, and you either have a stable of employees that you almost have to, it's like you got to feed the monster when you've got the employees, right? And I, on the construction side of it, was so much less or more susceptible to the economy and recession and slowdowns and that type of thing, that I really didn't want to have full-time employees. So I sourced the right subcontractors, and especially subcontractors that were multi-trade. When someone's can do finished carpentry, drywall, and paint, that's a gold mine, right?
Yep.
So all of our employees, we kept focused on doing the drying out, the cleaning up, and then we would start another job that was strictly subcontracted for the construction.
Yeah, yeah.
So
and you're talking, you're not talking major. So this isn't like Hurricane Katrina type, complete devastation. No. You're talking washing machine leaks.
Exactly. Which, don't get me wrong. When someone goes away on vacation for 10 days and they come back and found that the supply line for the toilet burst soon after they left, it looks like it was raining indoors. But a lot of them, they would range from small one-room jobs to re-outfitting the whole house and anywhere in between.
But still, quite a lot of work, because it's surprisingly common, right? Those sort of mishaps, which anything to do with water on the inside of a house is where it's not designed to be.
Well, what was interesting is that I got a good look in on the after effect of poorly built, because I would say more than half the time the damage would not have occurred if it had been built properly in the first place. The whole with passive house durability, that concept in large part for code built houses today is almost non-existent.
Yeah.
Even today, the outdoor on a commercial multifamily, apartment houses with breezeways, those sprinkler systems can't go down below 9 degrees or they freeze, because they're not dry systems, they're wet systems. So, even that type of thing where it's built to code, but it doesn't withstand the normal ebb and flow of seasonal weather, and frozen pipes in the wall, ground shifting and leaks in slabs, and they don't, it's just not, as everybody knows, code built home is not durable. It's almost disposable.
Yeah.
And so I would constantly be coming in behind contractors that had maybe done work a year or 3 years ago, finding where the shoddiness of the work done, even though it quote unquote passed inspection, wasn't adequate enough. So I like anybody who's been in construction long enough, you do enough demo, you see enough problems, you recognize the weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that having that opportunity to take buildings apart, or or being forced to take them apart, is a great.
We do a couple thousand jobs a year. I mean, our company was a good mid-sized small business. We had about 35 employees. we would do 1,500 to 2,000 jobs a year. And
Just
so,
in the local area?
yeah, just probably 35-mile radius of the center of Charlotte.
Yeah.
We didn't chase storms. We didn't do any of that. It was just
Didn't
took
have
care
to, by
of
the sound of it. So you got to see a large number of what it looks like when things go wrong, which seems like an amazing apprenticeship, quite a long extended apprenticeship, learning about building failure, basically.
Absolutely, and many times we didn't have the luxury of having a full demo. We were only demoing what was affected, and then we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we build it back and not have that be a self-fulfilling prophecy of it's going to happen again.
Yeah, and that's probably some of the hardest building to do, where you're having to put things back and fix into an existing structure rather than
and especially when you talk about waterproofing, because we would open up a wall because there was a drywall had been burned, right? And we would open up a wall and see where for years water had been leaking in from the outside because poor weather screening and everything, and then trying to figure out, okay, how do we solve this without having to strip the entire front of a house off? And then there were times it's like we told the customer, we can address this portion, but you likely have problems. You're going to have problems in the future in other areas because insurance was only going to cover for the immediate damage.
Yeah. And it's always, I've done a little bit of, but it's quite disheartening for the owner because it's going to cost a lot of money. And it's not going to be a significant improvement. They're just putting it back the way it should have been and reinstating it. So it's not like you're doing this big, exciting renovation and getting a brand new wing of the house. I mean, they might take the opportunity to update the bathroom or the kitchen, I guess. But there's the cost is going to be
fixing a building once it's up to give it the durability is, for all intents and purposes, impossible. You wind up just getting creative and sometimes putting Band-Aids. Sometimes, you wind up using a high technology approach to it. For instance, a self-sealing, expanding polymer on the outside of a masonry building in order to prevent the water from getting through the masonry, because if it gets through the masonry, there's no rain screen behind it.
Yeah. So where did you first come across Passive House?
Well, we sold the business coincidentally at the end of 2019. September, we closed and sold it. And then I finished onboarding the new general manager in March, beginning of March, which when you think of March of 2020 is when everything shut down, right? And I make the joke that, I fully admit I was bathroom man for a while. It's like, you're not going anywhere. And I was trying to figure out, what did I really want to do? I've always been, my thought on, conserving resources and recycling and, durability and all of the not necessarily carbon reduction at that point, has always been a practical approach.
Yeah.
You can spend 5 times the money for a 5% improvement on something. And, you might get some people to do it. There'll be some that go along, but the vast majority of people are only going to do it if it's a relatively easy hurdle to get over. So when I came across Passive House, I was like, this is perfect. It's like, yes, there's an incremental cost, but there's a tangible benefit that is an immediate, you feel good because you saved 300 pounds from going to a landfill, an immediate and impactful reduction to the individual in what they're going to spend long term, and it's provable, and it's a very tangible result for the customer, which I think has got to be an inherent part of selling it to them. Is they've got to be able to see it, touch it, feel it, see it.
Yeah.
And it was only when I got halfway through the certification course that I realized that PHI and PHIUS were not synonymous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So here I am getting certified by Germany. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, the things that they were talking about through the certification process were appropriate, but not necessarily appropriate for our climate. If you're up in Maine, Canada, New England, it's very appropriate. PHI is a really good fit. But some of the things they were talking about, I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to figure out how do we apply that to our southern hemisphere here. And that's when I discovered PHIUS was a separate entity. In for a penny, in for a pound, I got certified in PHI, and then I got certification through FIUS, so the FIUS. And so I got certified in both.
Yeah, so you've done both, but you're finding that you're using, and you're certifying projects now?
I've got one project underway. I've not been able to have a certified build yet. I've taken the concept, I've been training my subcontractors on remodeling jobs we're doing, and where we're remodeling it, we're doing it to a passive house standard as my way of training them, and also from a durability on the remodels I'm doing. But I've got one house that is currently almost through the architectural design process that will be a certified house.
Right. And how's that come about? Do you, is it something you have to up spec and sell to a prospective client, or does the client come to you knowing that that's what they want?
A bit of both. I'll say, what I've found is that most of the people who've contacted me have contacted me from stumbling across my website or stumbling across me in either PHI or FIUS's website.
Right.
It's been a mix of all three.
Yeah.
And they come to me saying, look, we like the concept, want to know more about it, what's involved with getting a passive house done.
Yeah.
A lot of them are window shopping. They're thinking about future, and they're thinking of, like, I had one gentleman who's like, I'm buying a house. I don't want to strip it or anything, but I want to make it passive standards.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, you can apply some concepts and principles, but you're not going to get the benefit by just cosmetic fixes.
Yeah.
It's the bones of the house that ideally you start with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but they've come to me in varying degrees. I had one person who came to me, he and his wife want to buy their first home, and they wanted to build passive, and they looked at buying existing, cost out of pocket versus building from scratch. And they were like, yeah, okay, maybe our second one, and we'll come back to you.
Yeah. Right.
But I've got one gentleman who he really had educated himself a lot. There are more and more, there's, promotion of passive, either direct or indirect. Matt with his build show talks about passive on a regular, frequent basis, the durability. And that's where he got a lot of his, Google web-based education.
Yeah.
And so he knew what he wanted. And I helped him source an architect. And that concept of find the builder, source the architect, and then design it as a team is, I think, absolutely the way to go. I've gone the other way. I've seen it go the other way, and it's hard to backtrack on a design if the architect doesn't have that skill set. And unfortunately, most don't on the residential end of it. So
what are some specific ways that is an advantage or can be a disadvantage if it goes the other way, as you mentioned, when the architect jumps in?
Specifications with passive, there are things that you really need to define up front before it's designed, finished design. In other words, before construction docs are generated, you need to know what are the windows, what are the doors, specific to the brand, model, everything about that as part of the energy modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And the exterior, and what's the best method that you cost effectively for the building to get the necessary R value, as well as all the different barriers that you need. And an architect on their own is not necessarily, some are okay, but many of them don't have enough of a background to do that. On one design I was involved in, the architect had spec'd a magnesium insulated board that is normally used on commercial high rises, and that drove almost $100,000 of additional cost into the building.
Yeah, wow.
And it was not a malicious. It wasn't. I won't say it was inept, but it was uneducated. Wait a minute, why are we spending $600 for a 4x8 board when we can spend 10% of that, 15% of that on alternatives? We had one that had specified out 7 inches under a slab and around the exterior walls, when challenged and going back and saying, this doesn't make sense from a common sense perspective, there was a clerical error in the calculations, and it was really only 2 inches that was needed.
Right.
The customer's not going to know that. And if the architect is making these kinds of design mistakes, and you produce construction documents and you're set to go, and now you have to go back and fix all of that, that's a very hard way to go about it.
Yeah.
Windows and doors.
When you say it's important to have the designer and the builder working together, is it for a passive house particularly, is it that at least one of those people needs to be a passive house? Is it the need for a passive house trained person to be on the job at the early stage, or is it that it's always beneficial to have the designer and the builder working together?
I think it's always beneficial. I think that it is critical for passive house,
right?
Because so much is spec'd out, and designed out. Our value of insulation. What type of insulation? Is it GPS, EPS, bat, rock wool? Is it exterior? Is it interior? Where are the thermal breaks? Some of those an architect will know from design perspective, but they don't necessarily know from a street smart perspective the most effective way to approach things.
Right. So even if that architect is a passive house trained architect, it's useful to have a builder on hand to check the buildability.
Yes. I know it's not required, right? You don't have to have a passive certified builder, but I think that you're giving up an advantage and handicapping yourself if they're not.
Yeah.
Because those are just battles, inadvertent battles, not purposeful, but inadvertent battles you're setting up for future. Because when you look at the barriers that need to be in place, whether it's air and vapor and water, there's times that it's an inherent part of the wall assembly that the framing carpenter who's going to be working on the job site needs to understand, to be aware of that. Unless someone has that knowledge of how that has to go together, they're not going to pick up on that detail. And it's very likely going to be a problem after the fact.
Yeah.
But even beforehand, specifying out the windows and what's the most cost-effective approach is not something that architects have a substantial handle on, because they're not involved in the execution end of it.
Uh-huh.
Not really. I mean, they might come in to inspect, but on this other build that I was involved with, the design, the architect had spec'd out windows that when we bid the window package out with the manufacturer, the architect specified, it was a $180,000 window package where it should have been a $60,000 window package.
Right.
All because they just chose the vendor based on the performance, not necessarily understanding the cost relevance.
Right. So were you able to address that and to to review that specification.
We were, and it wound up. What wound up happening is that then construction docs had to go back into the design process. The energy modeling had to happen all over again, get approved. It was several $1,000s. It was a lot of man hours involved
Of rework.
of rework of things that you could have anticipated to begin with. There's always going to be things after the fact. Always, no one's perfect.
Yeah.
No design is perfect, but these are things that could be prevented. That rework can be prevented. And that's why that synergy of the builder and architect, both being certified, both understanding passive, working together with the homeowner to execute on the design.
What would be one of the main things that you've taken from all your experience looking at damaged buildings that you've brought now into your work in passive house?
Water,
right?
Management. I've seen so many times where we open up a wall because the drywall and insulation was wet because it flooded inside. And we find where the exterior sheathing, the framing is water damaged, rotted, stained, where we have uncovered a different ongoing water leak that not covered by insurance, but absolutely going to hurt the long-term viability of the building if it isn't addressed.
Right.
Water management by far, and vapor management in our area.
Yeah.
Code used to require that you put 6 mil visqueen on the inside of a wall. That was their vapor barrier that you had to put it up. And I just finished a major remodel where we gutted 2/3 of the upstairs. And almost every wall cavity, the insulation had a brown to black color to it because it had obviously gotten wet from condensation and where the temperature differential was, and the heavy vapor pressure from the outside in Charlotte. And there was mold everywhere. And it was just an inherent nature of what was required to be built at the time the house was built.
Yeah, so that's a perverse outcome from something that was probably put there because of water management, but not under
good intentions.
Yeah, good intentions, but not understanding, not necessarily liquid water, but the movement of vapor and then kind of that condensing inside the wall. And that's, I guess, the kind of damage that happens over time. It's not the phone call that you get because the washing machine's leaking or a pipe's burst. That takes a long time. And it's also
it's not a damage that you can easily diagnose without destructive methods. We've all walked into a home, and especially me, having done disaster restoration 20 years. I walk into a house and I'm immediately even picking up on odors, and it's like, they've got a problem. Old homes are known for it, but even new homes, where either they had a water damage, they didn't mitigate properly, it wasn't built properly, the windows are leaking, the doors are leaking, vapor's getting trapped, a whole range of things. And those are very expensive to fix afterwards.
Yeah, and we're seeing that in lots of places, and coming back to Houston and Fierce, but just good practice in general. Really interested to see where this goes, particularly in those warmer climates, like you mentioned, where you've got the vapor drive coming in from the outside, and it's something that we really need to be careful of as we're intentionally doing better air tightness, which is good. But we also need to be considering vapor control and ventilation and how that works in that particular environment. I think that's the really exciting place where we're at now, is not just transplanting a building system from northern climates or stuff that you would have seen back in Montana, but actually saying what's going to work in this warm, humid climate where there might be air conditioning on the inside, but it's warm
majority of the year. Right. And that's where I really found myself naturally gravitating to Fias versus Sky, because you're not going to build a house in Miami the way you're going to build it in Maine. You will have problems if you do. And and both are good standards. But I that's where I be renewing my PHI certification? Not unless I move up north.
Right. Well, I guess, and partly that points to modeling and knowing the building, knowing how building physics works, and knowing the science of moisture control, and knowing that in some places it's a good idea to do a woofy analysis, regardless of which flavor of passive house you're doing, but just knowing how that vapor is going to move in that particular environment, what your internal conditions are and what your external conditions are.
Right. And having a standard you can rely on.
Yeah.
Because it's not your minimum code for sure.
Yeah.
Right now, code on this type of building now, there is no vapor barrier required. It's vapor open design now, because they recognize that when they had 6 mil plastic on the inside of a house, the problems they naturally created.
Yeah.
But vapor open isn't necessarily the answer either, depending on how the building's built.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very good. Hey, well, thank you, Steve, for your insights and for your good work. Hope it continues to go well for you in those projects, and I hope you get to do many more passive house projects.
No, thank you. I'm looking forward to it, and keep. We all need to keep pushing it, and as that standard becomes more adopted, economies of scale will kick in as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, keep up the good work. Thank you, Steve.
And that was Steve McKee, now of Quality Renovation Services, and also a fierce builder. What do you think, Zach?
Well, I love the quote, "Built to code is almost disposable." That was, that seems about right. And he would know, given all that training he received in demoing problems and seeing where the weaknesses are. That seems like a really great foundation to be working from.
Yeah, I mean, I often reflect on it was a relatively short time that I had as a building surveyor, but incredibly valuable. I mean, I've seen pictures from people like Joe Steebrook who get to go around and take photos of where buildings have gone bad, and I got a very condensed version of that, being able to take cladding off and see where there was moisture inside the walls. Usually it had initiated from a complaint from mold or something on the inside, or just something not happening, not working correctly in the building. And just seeing the extent of damage that moisture can do, and the mold that can grow, and then to diagnose why that problem existed. And what started, in our case, the interesting aspect of that was the whole industry of leaky buildings started from water getting in from the outside. And that started to get resolved as soon as people started getting sued. And what we found is, as we continued to open up buildings, and we were finding more and more that there was mold, but it wasn't because of water getting in. It was because of moisture accumulating on the outside, and we'd sealed up the outside so much because people were so scared of water getting in, and they didn't want to get sued and be responsible for water damage from outside. But there's no real knowledge of how building science works, and psychometric charts and hygrothermal modeling, those sorts of things. Which is what we're seeing now with a lot of moisture accumulation from the inside. So I think, Steve's experience is relevant for a number of reasons. He's used to working with teams. He's used to seeing how buildings come together. Doing renovations always really complicated, much more complicated than building from new. But also just having that really appreciation of the damage that water can do.
Yeah, right. And kind of from a code perspective, the potential for good intentions colliding with bad science to lead to some big problems. So it's I feel like this whole world of building science and kind of the passive houses it couldn't be seen as sort of the logical conclusion of that whole journey. Is one of trying to like cope with some of those early missteps that were happening, that just not, again, not bad intentions, just not a full understanding of the building science that's driving these problems. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and yeah, Joe Steebrook and folks like him are have been instrumental in helping us navigate all that.
I guess the other thing that stood out for me, I really like chatting with people like Steve who have had great experience on building sites. From a business point of view, how it's possible to build a pretty substantial business just by doing a decent job and providing good service. And he mentioned that to me on the bus a few times, and just how with his team he always tried to instill relatively simple things like turning up when you say you're going to turn up, and as a tradesperson that makes you stand out.
Right.
And he had I think around 30 team members before he pivoted towards a passive house, and that was really relatively local. He was only working in that local area of in North Carolina there, and I think it's just a really good reminder that you don't have to set out to change the world, but you can establish a pretty successful business providing a really good service and doing good work to a group of people in your area that value that work, and that's a great way to build a sustainable business and do the good work that you want to do. And I think that's absolutely transferable to Passive House, whether you're a consultant or whether you're on the tools working as a builder. So yeah, I just find it very inspiring talking to practical business owners like that.
Yeah, well, and it seems like that's sort of that ethos is what drove him to Passive House as well, because he really emphasized that he was excited about Passive House because it brings tangible results to the customer, which is kind of the most fundamental form of customer service, is to provide tangible results, right? And amazing that they were doing a couple thousand jobs a year. And what incredible timing he had to because I can imagine that a business like that's dealing with unexpected leaks and people going away and coming back a couple weeks later, and after a toilet's been gushing for that time, I bet a lot of those that all of that must have closed down significantly, not to mention just the difficulties of getting into people's houses during COVID. So
yeah
I was also given that my intro to Passive House was when I was with a builder, just that the valuing of builders in the real world experience, and how powerful it can be to have a builder who is also a trained Passive House practitioner.
Yeah.
I think that really resonated. And I think that there are certainly many successful examples of projects that have been done by very experienced Passive House designers working with a builder who's new to it. But there's also, we all know that there's this learning curve that happens, and also the potential for all the rework if there are some missteps, and not to mention this, those two examples where he was talking about the kind of crazy panels that were $600 a piece that were specified by designers simply because they probably didn't have access to good information yet about what were better options, and then also the window package. It's like there are so some of those missteps can also really give this new thing in a new market, Passive House, a undeserved reputation for being really costly. So there are all sorts of reasons that it's great to basically spread the knowledge, right, and figure out how we as practitioners can be finding new, sharing what we know. I say we. I'm not a practitioner, so I guess I'm pretending to be one. But it's certainly that knowledge sharing is what motivates what we do here. And so I just, that really resonated from what Steve had to say.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased to have met Steve, and I'm very pleased to, of course, thanks to the Passive House Accelerator, to have been in Chicago at all. But really great that grateful that he was happy to jump on a call and talk some more. He's very keen to share his journey, and now has become a real advocate for Passive House in general, and takes every opportunity to tell people about it. So, yeah, great stuff. Keep up the good work. All right. We want to give another little plug for Reimagine.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we have, in terms of upcoming events, we will be back with Passive House Accelerator Live on the second Wednesday of the month in January. So that is January 10th. So just a couple more weeks, and then we'll be back at it. And then, of course, the big event that we are planning and getting very excited about is Reimagine Buildings 24. So here's a quick reel about that event. Imagine you could learn about 24 of the best buildings solving for climate change, instantly become part of a global movement, and gain the knowledge you need to create real change in what you do every day. Join us for a one-of-a-kind, 24-hour, around-the-world, global online happening, Reimagine Buildings 24. We'll circumnavigate the globe, unveiling a new, innovative building project every hour, complete with actionable solution sets, expert insights, and key lessons learned. We'll connect you with peers from around the world and from your region, so you can build the network you need to create buildings that make a difference. We all know that time is of the essence, that climate change is already here, and that today, too many of our buildings are not only making the problem worse, but also leave us vulnerable to climate extremes that are already here. But that's all changing. A global movement is turning it around, reimagining buildings as resilient and healthy havens, as climate solutions. Tradespeople, builders, architects, engineers, developers, policymakers, and just regular people making it happen on the ground on every continent of our beautiful planet. Join that movement at Reimagine Buildings 24. Okay, so I hope folks join us. We're getting the program it's really starting to shape up, and I am so excited about it. And it's incredible how short 24 hours actually is. There's no way that we're going. I mean, there's so many things we're not going to be able to share just because there's so many wonderful things happening, and that's what's really cool about this event. We have this chance to share it.
Well, especially when you're going around the world, and there's a few people who have already put their hands up to be showcased from Australia and New Zealand as part of that 24 hours, 24 projects. So there's a lot going on out there. It's good. Very good. All right. Will this be our last show for 2023, Zach?
This wraps up 2023. What an amazing year it's been. What have we? I'm curious what I'm going to look up real quick how many downloads the podcast has received so far, all time. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for following and supporting us in this work.
And of course, we've had a bunch of bonus episodes this year as well. We've been able to record and talk to tons of people from multiple events and push out a lot more than just the regular weekly episodes. So it's been great to be able to do that.
Yeah, I hope so. So 343,000 downloads.
Nice.
Pretty cool. So
nice.
Yeah, thanks everybody for downloading and listening.
Yeah. Don't forget to share, and we'll be back next year. Have a good break if you're having one at all. And we've got some more great content coming up for 2024 ahead of Reimagine. And of course, really excited about Reimagine as well. We'll catch you then, Zach.